Shaun Andersen, he was pre-med, but decided not to become a doctor.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we were joined by Eddie again.
I am Eddie.
Yo, Eddie, stand-up guy. Actually met Eddie through Shaun Andersen, and Eddie actually worked with Med School Insiders a few years back. Really excited to see what he has to say.
All right, so give us some background, some context. Tell us about yourself.
So I was originally pursuing medicine in college. I did my undergraduate degree in biology with a minor in psychology. Pretty standard pre-med pathway.
Yeah, so the majority of pre-meds who end up going to med school are actually a biological science degree major. Something like 56%, if I recall correctly.
But as I got closer to the point of applying, I made the decision to pivot and try something else. And after a few pivots and a bit of experimentation, I now work in project management for a medical device company. Last week, I worked with our marketing department to help them build out their content calendar and 12-week plan. We're also implementing a new ERP system or enterprise resource management system. So I'm working with a bunch of different departments to make sure that transition goes smoothly. And then, even things like new devices that we're developing. So it's really interesting getting to do a bunch of different things within this role and just kind of get to peel back the curtain a little bit on how the business works or how new medical devices are developed.
One thing I love about what Eddie is saying there is the variety he has in the work that he's doing. So he's not just focusing on one very narrow aspect. And I think when you're younger, especially when you're in your early 20s, maybe you're right out of college, and if you don't quite know what you want to do yet, let's say you're not 100% gung-ho about becoming a doctor, then you want to get experience to a lot of different things. And when you're in a role like this that allows you to see, he's talking about content, he's talking about medical device development, he's talking about subject matter experts, it allows you to see what you gravitate towards, and you're getting a little sampling at this buffet, if you will, before you decide to really dive deep into just one thing. Because oftentimes, as you start going up the ladder in your career, then you're going to start narrowing down, and you want to make sure that you're narrowing down on something that you truly enjoy.
So what originally made you want to pursue medicine?
Basically, kind of typical pre-med story. A lot of my family is in medicine. So my dad was a psychiatrist. My mom's a nurse. My eldest sister is a practicing neurologist. My little sister's a nurse. So from a young age, I was always exposed to healthcare and the medical field. Some of my earliest memories from when I was a really little kid, like 5 years old, were going to the hospital with my dad while he was on rounds. So when he was in the room seeing patients, I was in the other room just doodling on my notepad, feeling like a little professional.
That's adorable.
So by the time I got to college, it was a really easy decision to go down that pre-med pathway. So I met with some advisors and decided on a biology degree with a pre-professional concentration and a minor in psychology. So that's what I ended up doing my college degree in.
So now you're in college, you're fully set on becoming a doctor. What happened next?
So in terms of college itself, I don't think there was anything too noteworthy. I just did all my prerequisite classes. So, my biology, my general chemistry, organic chemistry,
physics.
Yeah, physics, which I actually took together with Shaun.
That was like the worst year, I think, of undergrad.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so interesting to me how people gravitate toward different prerequisites in college for med school. And there's a couple common offenders. A lot of people don't like organic chemistry. That is the traditional weeder course, where it's very challenging, it's hard to get a good grade, and therefore a lot of people don't like it. And then there's also biochemistry, which is also very polarizing. I know at UCLA, they considered that one single class to be the hardest med school prerequisite, especially if you worked with Dr. Nelson. But I thought she was excellent, and she was actually very friendly. And shout out to her. She actually wrote me a very strong letter of recommendation. I did enjoy her class quite a bit. And I actually loved physics both in high school and in college. And I think it depends on if you like math or not, because physics is, of course, a lot of math. And number two, can you apply it to something physical? So, both Shaun and Eddie do a lot of that tricking and like the gymnastic stuff, whereby there's a lot of physics that is relevant to their hobby, right? So for me, it was like cars and soccer and things like that I would translate with physics. And I actually liked physics and math so much that even when I started college at UCLA, there were two math courses. I remember one was for like the life science majors that I was supposed to take as a prereq for med school. And there was another math that was harder for like the engineers and for the math majors. And they both met the requirement, but because the life science one was at 8 a.m. and the engineering one was at 11 a.m., I was like, you know what? I'm going to do the engineering one instead. So I took the harder math simply because it was later in the day And I also admittedly did enjoy math quite a bit.
But in terms of other things that I did to prepare myself for applying to medical school, my first job in college was actually as a medical scribe in the emergency department. And, later on, Shaun actually ended up working for the same company.
Yep.
So I did that for almost 4 years, like 3.5 years.
You started when you were like 19, right?
I started when I was 18, and
Wow.
I worked there until probably the time I was like 21, 22 years old. So
It's like
a lot of those
yeah.
foundational years were spent in the emergency room.
It's actually a really excellent extracurricular for a few reasons. Number one, you're going to learn the terminology. It's not going to seem as foreign. Number two, you're essentially getting shadowing experience because you're scribing for the doctor. And then number three, you understand the dynamics of healthcare in a much more immersive way versus just watching things on YouTube or on TV.
Working with doctors and nurses and PAs and NPs. So I did that for a period of time, but I kind of wanted to get more hands-on experience because, of course, as a scribe, you're very limited in what you can do. So I actually ended up partway through my bachelor's degree actually taking a year and doing my EMT and my advanced EMT certifications. And once I passed those, then I kind of transitioned from working in the emergency department as a scribe to then working as an advanced EMT, both on the ambulance and off the ambulance.
Wow.
So it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, scribe in the ED to then EMT, it sounds like if Eddie were to continue medicine, I wouldn't have been surprised if he ended up becoming an emergency medicine physician. And for those who are interested in emergency medicine, they want to be an ED doc, an emergency department doctor, then I think what Eddie did here in terms of extracurriculars is actually a really good fit. And doing so not just builds the relevant experience, but it also gives you, again, great insight to determine whether or not it's a good fit. Do you like that fast-paced nature, the unpredictability, the sense of chaos and adrenaline, or do you like something that's more controlled and subdued?
So I did that for a couple of years, but all of my experience with medicine up until that point was with emergency medicine. So I kind of wanted to experience something different. And around that same time, Shaun actually was working in medical oncology as a medical scribe. That was around the same time that he had just gotten into medical school and was about to be leaving for medical school. So then I ended up taking over his role and working with that physician. So I got then some experience in oncology. And then it was around that time that I started to kind of reconsider what I wanted to do. And at that point, I had, taken all my prerequisite courses. I had taken my MCAT and gotten a competitive score. By that time, I think when I calculated it, I had like 7,000 hours plus of clinical experience.
So pretty much by that time, you were like just as ready as I was to go to medical school, if not more ready. You had way more clinical experience than I ever had going into medical school.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of clinical experience, I definitely had the upper end of what is typical of your traditional pre-med student.
So was there a turning point that made you start questioning your decision to go into medicine?
So I don't think it was one specific moment for me. I think more so it was just a slow progression of various experiences throughout my undergrad and throughout my clinical experiences that eventually culminated in me deciding not to pursue medicine.
One pattern I'm noticing too is that a notable proportion of pre-meds who are above average in terms of their clinical exposure and experiences, a larger proportion of them don't actually end up pursuing medicine. And I think that goes back to what I've been saying many times on this channel and on the Med School Insider channel, which is that a lot of people want to become doctors, but a lot of people don't understand what it actually is. And if you take 100 pre-meds, I think 75 of them would be very happy in medicine, but 25 of them would not. And the question is, how do you know if you're part of the 75 or the 25? And I think those pre-meds who get more clinical experience, and they can see with their own eyes with greater certainty what it actually means to be a physician and to interact with physicians on a more regular basis, I think that they are better able to distinguish whether they are part of the 75 or the 25. And if they feel that they're part of the 25, then they can not pursue medical school, right?
So your first experience was as a scribe in the ER throughout college. What was it about that experience that pushed you away from medicine?
So I think what ended up happening was I just had a few experiences in different doctors that I worked with and talking with them. There were a few that explained to me how if they could kind of go back and do things again, they would do a completely different pathway.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to make it sound as though every doctor I worked with had a negative experience, but there were a few that I recall very vividly. There was a doctor I was working with and we were having a pretty rough shift, and she was basically confiding in me that medicine was so attractive to her because it's such a planned out pathway.
As humans, we love certainty. We don't like uncertainty, so much so that there's like this one study, right? People would rather knowingly take an electrical shock and hurt themselves of a larger magnitude versus having the uncertainty of being shocked some point in the future at a lower magnitude. They want to just get it over with, even though it is more painful. Just do it now, get it done with. Certainty versus uncertainty. human nature.
You go to college for 4 years, then you go to medical school for 4 years, and then residency, and then at the end of it, you're a successful doctor.
It's like a guaranteed path, like a safe path if you're willing to put in the work.
That's why so many people who go into medicine tend to be very risk averse. From what I've seen, that is a consistent clustering when you compare it to the general population, more risk averse.
And she was explaining that it was so attractive for that reason. And now that she's on the other side of that and practicing as an emergency medicine physician, she was explaining how she was just miserable and how she felt trapped because of the debt burden.
Yeah.
And, she felt that she couldn't do something else or couldn't pivot because financially, if she wasn't working as a physician, she wouldn't be able to pay back the loans that she had accumulated.
Yeah. One thing that I've also noticed, over my pre-med and med school years, talking to attendings, those who regretted their decision usually were younger, were usually either still in residency or fresh out of residency within the first few years. And they had student loans and they were still kind of getting on their feet. And they were comparing themselves to their peers who did not go into medicine, who, in terms of maybe life landmarks, if you will, were further ahead. Maybe they'd already bought their own home, they were much better off financially at that point in their early 30s or late 20s, right? But then I noticed those physicians who were much older, let's say 45 plus, they were much more positive on average. Because at that point, you have separated yourself from the brutal years of med school and residency, and you have more years under your belt. You're much more comfortable being a physician. You've definitely paid off your loans by that point. And now, because you have this much larger income, you don't feel like you're behind. Since now at that point, in your mid-40s and onwards, probably even sooner than that, we can actually run the math and run the numbers on that. But you're now catching up and exceeding your peers who did not go into medicine. And as much as they say that you shouldn't compare yourself to others, comparing yourself is, first of all, a very natural thing. As humans, we are social status-seeking creatures, and also has a lot of utility in terms of knowing more objectively what things you're doing well, but also what things you need to improve. Which is why, yes, I do compare my own driving technique on the racetrack to those who are faster than me, because I want to know how I can learn, right? Or I compare our YouTube videos to other YouTubers to see, again, what are we doing well and what can we improve? So comparison gets a bad rap, but it's a nuanced thing.
But what about when you worked as an advanced EMT? What about that made you steer away from medicine?
After those conversations with those doctors, I thought, maybe part of this too is just being a scribe in the emergency department. So maybe getting more hands-on direct experience where I'm the one actually taking care of the patient would help change my perspective on things. So I started working as an AEMT, which was really neat because I got to put into practice a lot of the things that I had learned from working with doctors in the emergency department. How to take a patient history, how to do a physical exam, how to communicate with other healthcare professionals. So it was really cool to get to kind of actually get hands-on and put a lot of those skills into practice. But something I realized about myself during that time is I have a tendency to kind of ruminate on things. So I could do 95% of things right for the patient, everything that I needed to do based on our protocols and whatnot.
Algorithms.
Yeah. And if I felt like I didn't do that last 5% right, I would really ruminate on it and have a hard time compartmentalizing it. And I found that very challenging.
It's a double-edged sword, right? Where you want your physician to be like that, where they are so careful and they do ruminate and they want to improve it and they want to treat every patient to the 100% of their ability, not just to 95% of their ability. But if you allow it to weigh on you and not use it as a learning tool, but it becomes this burden, it's going to wear you down and burn you out. But as we said in surgery, how you do anything is how you do everything. So those people that I feel became the best surgeons or the best physicians, right, were those who, just as a core feature of their personality, they took pride in doing everything to the best of their ability. Like, you couldn't see them half-ass something because it just was counter to their core. But again, it's a careful balancing act because sometimes that can correlate with this rumination and being a bit hard on yourself.
So that ultimately led me to be like, okay, maybe it's emergency medicine. I've worked in the hospital now in the emergency department. I've worked in the pre-hospital environment. Maybe EM just isn't a very good fit for me.
So then you went on to becoming an oncology scribe at the clinic that I used to scribe at.
Exactly. And that was really neat because it was a completely different side of medicine.
Yeah. So
not only was it a different specialty, but a completely different setting. So that was in outpatient clinical, so kind of 9 to 5 office environment. And oncology, as opposed to emergency medicine, there's a lot more continuity of care.
Yeah.
So you're seeing the same patients oftentimes on a weekly basis while they're doing their chemotherapy, and you get to build these much longer term relationships with them.
So how'd you feel about that versus emergency medicine?
So I will say I actually really enjoyed that element of continuity of care to get to know these people over time.
Yeah.
But the thing about medical oncology, as you know, is it's one of those specialties where the highs are high and the lows are low. So just as you see patients who get better over time with the treatments, you also see patients who progressively get worse.
When it comes to choosing a specialty, you have to remember that within medicine, there is so much variety. So emergency medicine versus oncology, on one axis, you can consider the duration of care, the longitudinal nature of that care. So in emergency medicine, there isn't really any longitudinal care. You're with the patients to stabilize them, and then you pass them off to a specialist or you discharge them. So no continuity there. Whereas with oncology, you're not seeing a cancer patient just once and saying, see you later. It's going to be several visits over weeks, months, or years. So there's this axis of longitudinal care and determining how much you gravitate towards the shorter term or the longer term care. The second axis here is the nature of the outcomes. So this is something that surprised me, and I hadn't really considered when I was a pre-med. It was only when I was in medical school and rotating. The nature of those outcomes being either positive or negative. And one thing that weighed down on me, more so than maybe the average person, was if there were frequent negative outcomes amongst patients, it got me down. It made me feel sad. It was like the whole day just became kind of gloomy. You know what I mean? So that's why neurosurgery, as an example, was not a good fit for me. Because terrible news after terrible news, speaking with patients and with their families, it made me feel down, right? And that lingered for multiple hours. It wasn't just, one and done. And that shouldn't be surprising because think about who needs brain or spine surgery. It's usually pretty severe stuff. It's not the rosiest of outcomes. Similar thing with oncology. So patients who have cancer are going to have, again, a clustering of negative and worse outcomes. And you have to decide that second axis of outcomes being either good or bad. You have to figure it out and get exposure to see, are you able to tolerate some bad outcomes, or are you able to bounce back and does it not really bother you? And we actually have some resources below that can help you choose a specialty either as a pre-med or a med student. Check the links down below. We actually cover these and much more in greater detail.
When you hear about all of these doctors and nurses and healthcare providers leaving the profession, and then you're having to make that decision on, is this something that I want to commit the next 8+ years of my life to, as well as take on these immense debt burdens?
And that's why you want to be very careful to make sure it is the right fit for you before you commit, because once you commit and you already have, even after 1 or 2 years, you already have substantial loan burden, it's a lot harder to then backtrack and say, oh, JK, never mind.
How did your friends and family take it when you told them that you were not going to do this path anymore?
I feel like they took it very well and they were very supportive. Like Shaun's like, I know you'll figure it out. You just got to put yourself out there and try other things and figure out what you like and what works. And medicine will always be there if you want to come back to it. Versus, if you commit to medicine and you try to pivot, it becomes much harder because of the things that we talked about in terms of being kind of committed and being in medical school.
No, I think that's a really good point.
I think that's good advice, that medicine will always be there. However, I do also want to speak to the concern that as you get older, it does become harder to attend medical school because you have greater responsibilities. You may not have the same level of energy and drive to push through those really tough years. And that's not to say that you cannot. I mean, I had classmates that were in their late 30s that were starting, right? MS1. And we even did a reaction video with a gentleman who's, I think, in his 50s. In med school right now. So you can definitely do it later. It's not impossible. All I'm saying is that it is harder. So keep that in mind.
And a lot of people feel like they have to rush through undergrad, right into medical school, take gap years. I took an extra year in college and I took a gap year. And I think that was the best decision ever. I wouldn't change that at all because it gives you more time to explore and really think about your career path versus just jumping right into it and not really giving yourself that time to think about, is this what you really want? Or time to explore other passions, hobbies, all that kind of stuff. It's always going to be there. You can always go back and apply to medical school. But once you're in, you're kind of pipelined for about 8 years.
And I like that advice of making sure it is the right thing to you before you commit, and take the extra year or 2 or 3 if you need to decide. However, what I don't want to be misinterpreted from this is that everyone needs to take a gap year. I did not take a gap year. I went straight through. And if it wasn't for my businesses that I started in med school picking up, I probably would have been very happy as a plastic surgeon. As you guys know, I left plastic surgery residency. Now, the reason why I don't think everyone should take a gap year is that if you already know that you want to become a doctor, that this is the right thing for you, and you say, hey, I just need to slow down, I'm supposed to take a couple years off before I go to med school, then there are downsides, right? You are delaying the ultimate dream you have of becoming a doctor. Some could also argue that because medical school gets more and more competitive by a small amount every single year, you're making it harder for yourself in the future. Although the counterpoint to that is you have more time to strengthen your application as well. So that one's kind of a wash. But the big thing is actually the opportunity cost. So the average physician in the US makes about $360,000 per year. So if you know that you are becoming a doctor for sure, and you're wondering whether or not you should take a few extra gap years just to hang out, chill, travel, whatever, that's a personal decision. One thing that you should keep in mind, though, is that if you wait an additional year before starting med school, that means you're going to be an attending physician 1 year later, which also means you'll have one fewer year as a fully trained physician before you retire, right? You're just going to be shrinking the number of years that you're practicing as a physician. And that ultimately means you won't be making that attending salary for at least 1 more year or 2 years, however long your gap years are. And that's 360 times 1 times 2 times 3 and so on. Now, obviously, everything is not just about your total salary. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying eyes wide open, understand both the pros and cons, and then make a well-informed decision rather than just hearing one side and just following that. And I have friends who did both. Those who went straight through and those who took 1 or more gap years, both were happy with their decision. And the ones who went straight through, I mean, it's pretty cool that you're an attending physician in your late 20s, you know? One of my buddies fully trained attending at 28. That's pretty cool.
My family all being in healthcare, it was very difficult for them that I was deciding not to pursue it. And there was this feeling of me throwing everything away, essentially. Yeah. I remember this one instance where I was talking to my eldest sister, the neurologist, about my decision to not pursue medicine. And I remember feeling like in that conversation, it was kind of falling on deaf ears because she ended up, in response to that, just sending me MCAT prep books.
Oh, jeez.
So that was a little bit tougher. And even still, I feel like I'm constantly having to justify or explain what I'm doing because there's always this feeling like, well, you could have been a physician, or you could have been a PA, or you could have continued down that pathway.
I think this is especially common in certain cultures where being a physician is very much valued as like the thing that you should be doing. And again, not everyone in those cultures is like that. I mean, I'm South Asian. My mom was very much like, you work too hard, chill out, like do whatever you want, but don't kill yourself doing it. And when I quit residency, I've told the story elsewhere, but my mom said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, here's why." And then she said, "All right, good, you work too hard." Because I was doing plastic surgery residency plus running 2 businesses and building a third. And I obviously wasn't sleeping that much. And my mom was just concerned about my health. And she said, this is like not healthy for anyone, let alone someone who has inflammatory bowel disease. And obviously that came from a place of lack of like needing to prove myself and workaholism and all that stuff. But that's a topic for another video.
I feel like once you make the decision to go into medicine, and there are other fields like this as well, but I definitely think medicine falls into this trap where once people know you're going down this path, they kind of have this really high standard for you, or they have these expectations of you that if you fall short of them, then it can add a lot of stress. And I think a lot of people do get stressed about letting their families and friends down when they choose this path.
True. And that's why I think it is so important that if you are the kind of person who is a people pleaser, and you know that your actions are very heavily influenced by what you think others are going to think of your actions, then be careful, man. Because I'm fortunate. I mean, it's kind of like there's pros and cons that come with it, but I'm wired in a way that is not as much like that. So that hasn't been as much my own concern. My buddies, Mike and Maddie from the Koi channel, also ex-doctors turned entrepreneurs, they were saying like, it's kind of ballsy to leave plastic surgery and make a public video about it, and to be one of the first to make that kind of video, where people just didn't do that. I mean, people started doing that after the fact, after I did it, but not before. And I just told them, I think I'm fortunate in that I'm wired in a way that I know that being true and authentic to myself is more important than worrying what strangers think about me. I do very much value what close friends and families think about me, but that's because I value their opinion, and I know that they are aligned in wanting what is best for me, whereas that is obviously not the case with strangers. But even still, you have to have the faith that you know what is best for you, because only you can understand your inner mind state, your emotions, right? Your true beliefs and desires. So even if your friends and family want what is best for you, they may not always know what that is.
And that was something that, even a lot of the doctors that I worked with, like the oncologist we worked with was phenomenal, like great physician, even better human being, really, really great guy.
Yeah.
And I remember he would tell me, he's like, you should just go to medical school. You'd be great at it. You'd be a phenomenal doctor. He's like, you already have the knowledge of like a second year oncology fellow.
Eddie's a very intelligent guy, very knowledgeable. I think that is a trap, though, that I think some mid-levels fall into, especially. Like, a lot of NPs and PAs will say, oh, I have been a nurse for these many years, and therefore I know just as much as the doctor. It's like, well, the doctors are trained on a lot more foundational stuff before they get to this pattern recognition at the top. The mid-levels, and also what Eddie was doing, is recognizing the pattern recognition at the top about how we use these treatments at these timelines, and these are the concerns that we have. And these are kind of the protocols that we follow. But when you don't have the training, the foundational training underneath, you don't understand how and why you arrived at those protocols, and then you don't also understand the edge cases and the exceptions to those rules. So that is the very dangerous slippery slope that the Dunning-Kruger effect, which goes like this. A lot of mid-levels end up being overconfident and not having anywhere near the level of competence that they should, given that high confidence level. And again, this is only some mid-levels. I'm not saying all mid-levels are like this, not trying to throw shade at mid-levels. I think when mid-levels and physicians work together collaboratively, things are beautiful. It's when the mid-levels think that they are justified and competent enough for independent practice, which I strongly disagree with, that I think we get into pretty bad situations.
How did you go about finding your new career path?
So for me, that was a struggle when I had decided not to pursue medicine.
Yeah.
You know, obviously the next question is like, what am I going to do instead? So I kind of did a bit of soul searching and thought about other things that I've enjoyed doing. So one thing that came to mind was when actually I was taking over the oncology scribe job from Shaun. The first 3 to 6 months of that job were incredibly challenging. So they had just changed over to a new EMR. So the whole way that they did documentation, put in orders, and all of that was completely different. And because of the sensitive nature of oncology and the kinds of conversations that you're having with patients, when I was training, there was a lot of hesitancy to have both me and Shaun and the oncologist all in the room. So in that job, I didn't really get a lot of hands-on training, and that made the first 3 to 6 months of that job very challenging. Like, I remember on one of my first days when I was alone, the doctor was having me put in orders for a PET scan, and I was like, I don't know how to do that. And he's like, me either. Go figure out how.
Yeah.
And so I walked to the front and I talked to the lab tech, and she explained to me how to put the order in. But meanwhile, the doctor was already in the next room seeing the next patient.
Yeah.
And so now I'm behind. For the first 3 to 6 months of that job, it was just feeling perpetually behind. So when I was leaving that job, I built this whole training document essentially explaining all of the common orders and how to put them in, the different common medications that we use for chemotherapy, how to build an oncologic history, what specific details are you looking for, all of the people that we would refer to, just basically everything that I wish I had known when I started that job.
You created the training document.
Yeah, I basically created a whole training manual for that position. So I actually really enjoyed that process. And so it kind of led me down the road of, okay, maybe this is something that I can do for a career. And there's actually this whole profession called technical writing, where you're building technical documentation in the form of training manuals, standard operating procedures, all of that kind of stuff. So it kind of led me down that path.
I think all the entrepreneurs are like, yes, love that shit, because it helps your business run a lot better when you are taking a complex process, breaking it down into something very simple and repeatable, and training someone else to do it. Because as a business owner, you have to learn how to delegate, and this is one of the most effective ways. And man, if this channel was about business operations and optimization and things like that, I could talk your ear off. But in short, you want to be very organized and structured, and that is the best way to help someone else take over a task that you used to do. So you grow a business not by working harder, but by delegating and scaling and using leverage in the form of capital in this case to grow your business and have a bigger impact.
But anytime you're pivoting from something that you have a lot of experience in to something completely new, you kind of have to be creative with how you approach it. Yeah. After I left that job, I ended up taking some technical writing courses to kind of help ease me into that transition. Yeah. And then coincidentally, Shaun had become friends with another YouTuber in the medical education space who was actually looking for somebody to help him with ghostwriting some scripts.
Yeah.
So since Shaun knew that I was pursuing a career in writing, and I had experience with medicine, and I had an understanding of medical school admissions and all the stuff that goes into that, he let him know about me and my experience. And
it was like a perfect fit, basically.
Hell yeah, man. I remember when Shaun told me, I was like, dude, this is excellent. Eddie was a pre-med, has all this understanding about being a pre-med, and I need someone to help me write scripts for Med School Insiders, which is, of course, for pre-meds and for med students as well. And don't worry, for those who are watching, every single video on Med School Insiders, I have been the one to review the script, put my finishing touches on, go back and forth with the person who's writing it, whether it's Eddie or someone else. But it just, again, allows you to scale and get more things done in less time. And yeah, super grateful to Shaun for making that introduction and for Eddie's time with us, because Eddie was great.
And fortunately, by that time, I had grown in that role to where not only was I helping with writing the scripts, but I was also actually managing the content creation team. So this is kind of where I started to get involved in project management.
Yeah, so not just writing scripts, but now also working with animators and editors to then take the script with the voiceover or the filmed footage and then getting that into something that is polished that can get uploaded and posted onto YouTube.
So now I had experience with writing and I had experience in management. So I took both of those things and again went and looked for technical writing roles within the medical device industry. So that landed me a technical writing role at the job I'm at now. So I did the whole technical writing thing for a while. I helped the company that I work for build out procedures for doing a variety of things, helped us go through FDA audits and ISO audits and all of that kind of stuff. But after a while, I realized that the part of technical writing that I liked the most was setting up the projects and less so the writing aspect. So when a position for project manager opened up, I jumped at the opportunity, and it's kind of how I ended up where I am now.
Being a generalist, as we talked about earlier, helps you decide what you want to do if you want to specialize and dive deeper and then, move up the corporate ladder in that field. The other thing that being a generalist helps you with is actually being an entrepreneur if you want to be an entrepreneur, because not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur, despite what some say on social media. Working a job doesn't make you a sucker at all. It requires a certain kind of personality, a certain kind of risk tolerance, a certain kind of work ethic to be a successful entrepreneur. You need to be a generalist, truly. So not every generalist should be an entrepreneur, but if you want to be an entrepreneur, being a generalist helps a lot because you have to wear many, many hats. You need to be doing legal stuff, content stuff, marketing stuff, operation stuff, culture building, employee management stuff. There's so many hats to wear.
Do you regret your decision at all?
I would say no. And the reason is, in not pursuing medicine, I've had a lot of experiences and I've done a lot of growth because of those experiences that have ultimately led me to where I am now. And I'm actually quite happy with where I am right now. If you like where you are in life, everything that you did leading up to it, you can kind of view it as a necessity. If any one thing, no matter how small or insignificant it is, changed, you might be in a completely different place.
They call that the butterfly effect, right?
If I changed anything about my pathway to get to where I am, I could be in a completely different place and I could be a completely different person.
Yeah, and I mean, he still ended up having an interest in healthcare, right? He's working at a biomedical company. So having those relevant experiences are still helpful in maybe not as direct ways as they would be as becoming a physician, but they are still relevant and still helpful.
And I feel like even if you aren't at that point where you're really happy with where you are, as long as you eventually get to that point, you can see everything as a necessity to get to where you are.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs said in one of his commencement speeches, I think it was at Stanford, that you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect the dots looking back.
There is a Winnie the Pooh quote that I really like, and it's quite deep for Winnie the Pooh. And it goes something like,
perfect timing. I'm talking about Steve Jobs and we're going to Winnie the Pooh. Love it.
You can only get to where you're going by walking away from where you've been. It might not be exactly that wording, but that's the rough idea. And it's kind of true. You can really only move forward in life by making decisions, taking steps. Whether they're the right step or the wrong step doesn't matter.
Well said, Winnie the Pooh. Some wise words.
Every single job, no matter what it is, there's always going to be parts of it that you don't like. You're never going to find that unicorn career where there's everything that you like and nothing that you don't like. There's always going to be aspects that you enjoy and aspects that you don't enjoy.
Even being a race car driver, which, as you guys can tell from the background, that would be my number one. Like, as a kid, I've always wanted to be a race car driver. Even that, despite me idolizing it and fantasizing about this in my head, has parts that I'm sure I would not like. And if you follow Formula One, you'll see some of the drivers that clearly do not like talking to the press, but they have to talk to the press. There's a lack of privacy when you're that famous. There's all these other things. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm sure being a Formula One driver is insane, incredible, in the best way possible. The point I'm making is that there are still things about that job, which is so great, that the drivers don't actually like, right?
It's about finding the one that you enjoy enough and the trade-offs are worth it in your mind. I used to feel like a failure sometimes because I decided not to become a doctor. The reality is I don't feel that I'm doing anyone any favors by entering a career field that I don't feel passionate about or I don't see myself enjoying. I feel like you can really tell the people who show up to work because they want to and the people who show up to work because they have to.
Yeah.
It's strange to feel like a failure just because you choose not to do a certain career path. And You have to always remind yourself what is the metric that you are using to measure yourself against others. Because again, as much as we like to say that you shouldn't compare yourselves, it's human nature. You are going to compare yourself to someone else. Like I compare myself to other drivers on the racetrack, as I said. And a lot of times people will compare themselves based on income or career prestige or things like that. But then you have to ask yourself, did you optimize your life around those metrics of income or career prestige? Because chances are you didn't. Chances are that you had some conflicting priorities. And the average person who doesn't go to med school, who doesn't go into residency, who doesn't become an attending physician, is going to have a much more balanced 20s than, and possibly even early 30s, than the person who does. And there's no right or wrong here. It just, they optimize for different things. And I have no issues working my butt off in my 20s, pushing my limits, building my work ethic and my level of grind, and seeing what I was capable of, and achieving things that I'm proud of. Don't get me wrong, I'm very happy and proud of those things. But I also clearly didn't have the same level of excitement, memories, experiences that some other people who didn't grind as hard through their 20s did have. And there's no right or wrong, but you do have to choose one. Either you grind through your 20s like I did, and you become a underlived but adequately skilled 30-year-old, or you live it up in your 20s, and now you have the opposite problem of being an adequately lived, having rich experiences, but maybe underskilled 30-year-old. Choice is yours.
And for me, I never wanted to be that person who is just showing up and going through the motions. If I'm doing something, I want to do it to the best of my ability, and I want to be fully present and there in the moment.
How you do anything is how you do everything.
You know, another big thing for me that I've taken away from this is something that's important for me is growth. The times where I've felt the most down throughout my life have been when I feel like I'm stagnating. So whatever you choose in life, I think it's important to challenge yourself, because you can't wish for growth and an easy life, because the cost of one is the price of the other. So you only grow by putting yourself in challenging situations and adapting.
Yeah, well said. Very true.
And on some level, you also just have to have the faith that, you know, things will fall into place, or you'll be able to figure it out when you reach that fork in the road.
Great video, Shaun and Eddie. Let me know what you guys think with a comment down below.